We spend a lot of time trying to fix anger in ourselves, seeing it as a negative emotion. And it can be scary, it can be destructive, but it can also be a powerful catalyst for change. That was a milestone lesson I learned over 2 decades ago. In the home in which I grew up, if there was a smell of food coming from the kitchen, then it was going to be a good day because it meant two things. One, there had been money to buy food, and two, someone had been in a good enough mood to cook it. If there was a smell of furniture polish, that red teak polish over everything else, then you should make yourself scarce. I was at the table doing my homework one evening when I was 17 years old. My father had not yet arrived home. My mother had been muttering to herself about it for an hour while she worked on a flower arrangement. That was something she did to earn extra money for the family. We heard him come home, the sound of his key in the wrought iron gate. My brother and sister quite wisely ran off to their bedrooms. I was used to the tension, this was nothing new, so I stayed put. My mother went to the doorway to prepare to confront him. She had learned to vocalize her dissatisfaction often, but she had not learned the courage to do so in her own voice. She often hid behind the opinions of other people to give her arguments credibility, even when those other people were her children. On this occasion, she ended her tirade by saying, "Even Chantelle thinks I should leave you." You know that cliche about a shadow passed across his face or a shade to describe anger? On that day, I understood what that meant. My father's complexion seemed to change as he glared at me. I could feel the anger. I gathered my papers off the table and tried to leave, tried to make not big a deal about it and go towards my bedroom. But as I drew opposite him in the doorway, he grabbed my right shoulder and spun me around to face him. "Is that what you think of me?" he said. That was something my father said so often it could have been an epitaph on his gravestone. I said something adolescent like, "You guys need to sort yourselves out." The disrespect was too much. He pushed the same shoulder he had just pulled, and I stumbled to my left into the living room. I dropped everything I was carrying and landed on my knees on the floor. I was startled. I was stunned at the force with which he had pushed me more than the fact that he had. I gathered my books off the floor and stood and spun around to face him. I've always been my father's child. He pushed me again. This time I fell backwards, dropped everything once more, and as I rose to my feet, I left it where it lay. I glared back at him, trying to match his energy. He used his boot this time. He kicked me on the hip, and I spun forward one more time. As I went in what felt like slow motion forward, I remember thinking that this would be funny if it wasn't so terrifying. I had been spun around no less than 4 times in the course of the past 5 minutes. I tripped over the freshly polished coffee table and smashed my face against its partner, my mouth filled with the taste of metal, and I was trembling. I realize now that it was adrenaline. But I could hear the sound of my mother screaming and banging against his chest. "Sylvester, stop!" It did nothing to slow him in his fury, but the sight of the blood streaming from my face seems to have had an effect because he paused. His face relaxed and he reached out his hand to try and help me up. I slapped it away angrily and said through gritted teeth, "Don't touch me." I stood up and said to my mother, "We need to go to the hospital." I could already feel that the wound was so deep that it would require stitches. I was right. I grabbed my dressing gown around my shoulders and we walked out into the cold air to the hospital at night. And my anger included the fact that I felt like such a stereotype, a colored woman walking to the doctor's office at night to get stitches because she was a victim of domestic violence. But that anger, although it took me many years to learn the lesson, became the fuel it took for me to take the steps that changed the trajectory of my life.